Vikings weren't just splashing around in dirty rivers or throwing themselves into freezing lakes to wash off the grime of their latest raid. What if I told you they had sophisticated ways to stay clean, far beyond what most people imagine? Today, we're going to uncover the truth behind Viking hygiene, and trust me, it's far more interesting than you probably think. Picture this: the Vikings were not only warriors, but also deeply concerned with their appearance and personal cleanliness. While many people believe they lived in filth, covered in mud and battle scars, the reality is that the Norsemen placed great importance on hygiene. They made sure they looked presentable, not just for themselves, but as a way to show their status within society. But where did they wash, and how did they do it? You might be surprised. Bathing wasn't just something you did once in a while. It was a regular activity in Viking life. In fact, they bathed far more frequently than many other civilizations of their time. Public baths weren't a rare luxury in Viking towns. They were part of the everyday landscape. Imagine walking into a bustling Viking settlement, and the first thing you notice is the strong scent of soap and fresh water in the air. Public bathing wasn't just about cleanliness. It was an event, a social space for both men and women. Vikings would gather together to scrub, soak, and converse, making it as much about socializing as it was about hygiene. But where did these Vikings get the water for their baths? Let's take a deeper look at their resources. Many Viking settlements were built near natural hot springs. Yes, these warriors had access to natural heated water that made their bathing rituals not only effective, but also remarkably luxurious for their time. While others in Europe were still living in cities without access to running water or warm baths, the Vikings were ahead of the game, taking full advantage of their environment. They knew how to turn the natural landscape into a luxury experience, and they made the most of it. Viking baths weren't just about removing dirt. They were about maintaining appearance and standing in their society. Just like today, your physical appearance said something about your wealth and status. The more pristine your skin and hair, the more favorably you were viewed. Bathing regularly wasn't just a personal matter. It was a reflection of your place in Viking society. And as we'll uncover later, it wasn't just about getting clean. It was about being seen in your best form. But here's something that might surprise you. The Vikings didn't just bathe for hygiene. They used these bathing rituals as an important way to demonstrate their identity and strength. Think about it. Viking warriors, known for their fierce battles and wild reputations, were also incredibly concerned about how they looked. Their grooming rituals, particularly before a raid or battle, were a critical part of preparing for war. This wasn't just about looking good for the sake of vanity. It was about projecting power, discipline, and the ability to care for oneself in a society that valued both personal strength and outward appearances. What's more, the Vikings were meticulous about the soaps they used. You might think of soap as a modern convenience, but the Vikings made their own, using animal fats mixed with plant ashes. This wasn't the bar soap we're familiar with today. The Viking soap was thick, often a pungent paste that helped strip away dirt and oil. It wasn't luxurious in the way we think of soap now, but it was effective and necessary for keeping their skin clean and healthy. But while bathing was a regular activity, it was the hot springs and their ingenious use of natural resources that really set the Vikings apart from other societies. Vikings were aware of the benefits of hot water. They didn't just use it to bathe, but also for relaxation and even for healing. Hot springs were seen as places of both cleanliness and spiritual rejuvenation. Many Vikings believed that bathing in the hot springs could purify not only the body but the spirit, washing away the impurities of their daily lives. This was not a trivial activity. It had deep cultural significance. Still, there's one major question that might be lingering in your mind. Why were the Vikings so concerned about staying clean? They weren't just living in small, isolated villages. They were also raiding, traveling, and engaging with other cultures. Hygiene wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about survival. Think about it. They were traveling long distances, sometimes hundreds of miles, from one settlement to another. Bathing and keeping their bodies free from parasites like lice and fleas was essential, especially in such a harsh, cold environment where diseases could spread quickly. Staying clean helped prevent illness, and in a time when a single infection could be fatal, keeping healthy wasn't just important, it was vital for survival. And here's a fascinating tidbit that might make you reconsider everything you thought you knew about Viking cleanliness. Vikings were obsessed with their hair. While you might imagine them with wild, unkempt beards and long, tangled hair, the reality was far different. Viking men and women took great pride in their hair. They used combs made from bone or wood, and archaeological digs have uncovered finely crafted grooming tools in Viking graves. For the Vikings, grooming wasn't just an afterthought. It was a deeply ingrained part of their culture and their identity. What's more, Vikings didn't just comb their hair. They took the time to style it in elaborate ways. Viking men were known for their long, braided beards, which were carefully groomed to project strength and virility. Viking women, on the other hand, wore their hair long, often braiding it in intricate patterns, signaling not just beauty, but a sign of their high status in Viking society. Here's a strange fact you might not have known. Archaeologists have found evidence of Viking barbershops in their towns, where people would go to have their hair professionally styled. While you might expect these to be simple, run-of-the-mill places, they were often decorated with intricate carvings and served as social gathering spots. These barbershops were where Vikings would come together not just to get a haircut, but to discuss business, politics, and trade. And all of this revolved around the idea of looking your best for society and for battle. You might still be wondering, was Viking hygiene really all that advanced compared to the rest of the world? The short answer is yes. While many other cultures during the Viking Age did not have regular access to baths or hygiene tools, the Vikings were far more advanced in their grooming practices than most people realize. They understood the importance of cleanliness, and they used the resources available to them: hot springs, natural soaps, and tools crafted with care to maintain their health and appearance. By the end of this video, you'll understand that Viking hygiene wasn't just about vanity or cleanliness. It was about survival, status, and identity. They were not the dirty barbarians history often paints them as. Instead, they were a society that valued personal care, making sure they were as healthy and presentable as possible in a world that was as harsh as it was unforgiving. And believe it or not, some of their hygiene practices laid the groundwork for what we consider basic grooming today. So, stay with me because we're just getting started. From their fascinating use of soap to their connection between cleanliness and religion, we're about to reveal how Viking hygiene practices were not only surprisingly sophisticated, but also essential to their survival and success. You might picture Vikings with wild, untamed hair, living in harsh conditions with little regard for their appearance. But believe it or not, they were meticulous about their grooming. In fact, grooming tools were so important to them that many Viking men and women carried them everywhere. Imagine a Viking walking through a bustling town, not just with a sword by their side, but also with a finely carved comb or a sharp razor tucked into their belt. It was a key part of their identity, and one of the most fascinating elements of Viking culture. When we think of the Vikings, we often think of fierce warriors, covered in blood, charging into battle. What most people don't realize is that Vikings were also very particular about their appearance, especially their hair. They had elaborate hairstyles, and surprisingly, paid great attention to cleanliness. Personal grooming was considered a status symbol, with neat hair and well-maintained facial hair signaling strength, discipline, and even high social standing. But it wasn't just about looks. Vikings understood that personal hygiene and grooming were essential to survival, especially when they spent so much of their time raiding, trading, or navigating harsh environments. Imagine being out on a long journey, battling the elements, and still managing to look presentable. This wasn't just for vanity. Grooming and cleanliness helped to keep them healthy, avoid infections, and stay strong for battle. Viking men and women carried grooming tools like combs, tweezers, and razors made from bone, wood, and metal. Archaeologists have uncovered these tools in Viking graves, hinting at how important they were to the Vikings. These tools weren't just for shaving or combing hair. They were a sign of social status and pride. Even the simplest comb was a symbol of careful maintenance, showing that the owner took pride in their appearance and hygiene. Hair grooming in particular was deeply ingrained in Viking culture. Men typically sported long beards, which were combed and oiled to keep them neat and presentable. Long hair was also common among Viking women, and they often braided their hair in intricate patterns, displaying not just beauty, but also their social rank. It's fascinating to think about how something as simple as hair grooming played such a significant role in the Viking world. Let's take a moment to consider an interesting fact that might make you think twice. Vikings didn't just groom for hygiene, they groomed as a way of showing off their power. Yes, you heard that right. They used their appearance as a way to assert their strength and status. Grooming was a crucial part of their warrior identity. If you were a Viking heading into battle, you didn't want to look like you hadn't bathed in wheat. A clean, well-groomed Viking was a confident Viking, one who was prepared to face whatever lay ahead with strength and discipline. But did you know that Vikings also carried small razors, which were used to trim beards and mustaches? This was a significant part of their grooming routine. Imagine what it would have been like to sit around a campfire after a long day of traveling, using a small razor to clean up your facial hair. That wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity for the Viking warrior. If you didn't look sharp, how could you lead a crew or stand in front of a crowd? To the Vikings, personal grooming was not just about cleanliness. It was a statement of who they were. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of Viking grooming is that they were not only concerned with facial hair. They paid just as much attention to their skin and nails. Small tools like tweezers were used to remove unwanted hair from various parts of the body, and some even had the means to care for their nails. Yes, Vikings were known to take pride in their nails. This may sound strange to us today, but for the Vikings, these small details mattered. They believed that cleanliness and appearance were tied to strength and power. Here's where things get really interesting. Grooming tools were often buried with the Vikings. That's right, archaeologists have uncovered razors, combs, and tweezers alongside Viking graves. These tools were so important that the Vikings wanted to take them into the afterlife. They believed their grooming practices, their commitment to cleanliness, and their appearance were integral to their identity, not just in this life, but beyond. It wasn't just about looking good today, it was about looking good forever. And this connection between grooming and identity was more than just a cultural preference. It was a belief system, a philosophy that intertwined with their views on strength, power, and survival. Here's a rare fact you may not have known. Viking grooming tools were highly valued, so much so that they were often passed down through generations. Some of the tools found in Viking graves were over 1,000 years old, indicating that Vikings didn't just use their grooming tools, they revered them. This deep respect for personal care can be seen as a direct reflection of Viking society's values. A well-groomed Viking was a strong, capable member of society, whether they were at home or out raiding, and that image was crucial for maintaining their cultural identity. It might surprise you to know know that Vikings didn't just use combs to style their hair, they also used them as tools for hygiene. Combs were used to get rid of lice and other pests, which were a constant threat in the harsh Nordic climates. Imagine combing your hair not just for looks, but to avoid a parasitic invasion. This wasn't just about vanity, it was survival. Staying clean meant staying healthy, and staying healthy meant staying strong in battle. As we continue to dive into the Vikings' grooming rituals, you'll begin to understand that their commitment to cleanliness and appearance wasn't just a matter of personal pride, it was deeply woven into the fabric of Viking culture. Grooming was about identity, status, and survival, and the tools they used, simple yet incredibly effective, were as much a part of Viking life as their ships, their weapons, and their legendary raids. But here's the thing, we often think of the Vikings as brutal, untamed warriors, but the reality is, their grooming habits show a different side of their culture, one that valued cleanliness, discipline, and respect for the self. In a world where survival was everything, these small acts of personal care helped them to not only stay healthy but to thrive. Now, imagine the impact of grooming on a Viking warrior about to embark on a raid. Their comb, their razor, their carefully maintained beard and hair were as important as their sword. In a world where first impressions were everything, looking the part was half the battle. So the next time you think of Vikings, remember that they were not just fierce warriors, they were also meticulous about their personal care. It was a statement of who they were, a reflection of their strength, and a testament to their survival in a world that demanded the best of them. While other cultures avoided sweating, Vikings embraced it in a very unique way. Sweat baths, what we might call saunas today, were an integral part of Viking hygiene rituals, and for good reason. For the Vikings, these hot, steamy environments weren't just about getting clean. They were about rejuvenating the body, mind, and spirit. The Viking sauna wasn't merely a luxury or indulgence. It was a practice tied to their social life, their health, and their warrior culture. You might think of sweating as something to avoid, a sign of exertion and physical strain. But for the Vikings, it was an essential part of maintaining their strength and health. Imagine the scene, a Viking stepping into a stone-heated room, the heat rising from hot stones carefully placed in the center. As the steam enveloped them, they would sweat out the toxins of the day, allowing their bodies to relax, rejuvenate, and refresh. The Vikings weren't the only culture to use sweat baths, but they took it to another level. In fact, many Viking towns and settlements included specially built saunas, wooden structures designed to trap heat, creating a space where people could cleanse their bodies and mind. Unlike other ancient civilizations, the Vikings believed in the profound healing power of sweat. It wasn't just about personal hygiene, it was also about socializing and connecting with others. The sauna was a place to gather, to share stories, and to bond. After all, these were warriors who spent much of their lives in battle or on long voyages, and a place to relax and unwind was essential for their mental and physical well-being. But what makes the Viking sauna truly fascinating is the way they used it. After enduring the intense heat of the steam, Vikings would step out of the sauna, often to be doused with cold water or even to roll in the snow, invigorating their bodies and shocking their systems into alertness. This ritual was believed to help build physical resilience, a key attribute for the warriors of the Viking Age. It was about toughening the body, much like their approach to battle and survival. The contrast between hot and cold not only provided physical benefits, but also helped to fortify the mind, making Vikings feel invincible. You might find it hard to believe that such a simple ritual could have such profound effects, but studies have shown that alternating between heat and cold can boost circulation, improve immune function, and even relieve muscle tension. The Vikings were, in their own way, pioneers of health and wellness, even if they didn't fully understand the science behind it. To them, the benefits were clear. They saw it as essential to their lifestyle, and it became a deeply ingrained practice. Here's something strange you may not have expected. Viking saunas were not just used by the elite. They were common across Viking societies. While wealthier individuals might have had their own private saunas, there were public saunas too, places where people of all social standings could gather, clean themselves, and rejuvenate. In fact, communal saunas were such a part of Viking life that they played a role in the social structure of their society. Just as public baths in other cultures were places for business dealings or community bonding, so too were Viking saunas used for everything from socializing to negotiating. Now consider this, Vikings didn't just sweat out the impurities of daily life, they also used the sauna as part of a spiritual ritual. To Vikings, cleanliness was not just a physical act, it had spiritual significance. By sweating in the sauna, they believed they could cleanse themselves not just of dirt but of any evil or bad spirits that might have clung to them. The belief was that purification of the body was a way of preparing the soul for important tasks, whether that was going to battle, embarking on a voyage, or taking part in religious ceremonies. The Vikings were also incredibly strategic in their approach to health. The regular use of the sauna was not only about hygiene or relaxation, it was about boosting physical endurance and strength. By using the sweat bath before a battle, Vikings would prepare their bodies for the harsh conditions they might face. Heat could stimulate their blood circulation, making them feel more agile and ready to fight. But more importantly, it helped their minds. The sauna was a form of mental preparation, helping them relax and calm their nerves before the chaos of war. This focus on mental and physical preparedness through the sauna shows just how advanced the Vikings were in understanding the importance of health, both body and mind. lived. It's also worth noting that Vikings didn't just use saunas for themselves. They were vital to Viking women too. While the Viking warrior is often portrayed as the focus of their culture, Viking women used sweat baths to keep themselves healthy as well. They were warriors in their own right, and their health was just as important as their male counterparts. Women used the sauna for similar reasons: relaxation, rejuvenation, and purification. This reflects the unique equality in Viking society, where both men and women were expected to maintain their strength and health for the benefit of the community. You might think that the use of saunas was something unique to the Vikings, but it wasn't. Many other ancient cultures, including the Romans and the Greeks, used sweat baths or steam rooms. However, what sets the Viking sauna apart is how integral it was to their social, cultural, and spiritual practices. The Vikings weren't just bathing for hygiene. They were engaging in a practice that helped them connect with their gods, their culture, and each other. There's one fascinating aspect of Viking sauna use that many people don't know. Some saunas were constructed using stones that were heated in a fire and then placed in the center of the room. These stones were called sweat stones, and they were the heart of the Viking sauna. The process of heating these stones was an art in itself, requiring careful attention to ensure they would provide the perfect amount of heat for the room. The Vikings took this task seriously, ensuring that their saunas would deliver the best possible experience. This use of saunas wasn't just for personal health. It also had a role in Viking society's collective well-being. In a society that relied so heavily on raids, travel, and battles, the sauna became a place of rejuvenation, where Vikings could come together, relax, and share stories or strategies. The communal aspect of the sauna helped maintain a sense of unity within Viking society, making it not just a health practice but a cultural cornerstone. So, the next time you think of the Vikings, imagine them not just as fierce warriors, but as a culture deeply in tune with their physical and spiritual health. Their saunas were more than just steam rooms. They were a key to their strength, their endurance, and their ability to face the toughest challenges. By using the sweat bath, they were engaging in a ritual that not only kept their bodies in top shape, but also helped them connect with each other and their gods. In many ways, Viking sweat baths show just how advanced they were in understanding the balance between body, mind, and spirit. And this ritual, so deeply ingrained in their culture, was a key factor in helping them survive and thrive in the harsh world they lived in. If you think Vikings didn't care about their teeth, think again. You'll be shocked by how they took care of their smiles. Picture this: a Viking warrior returning from a raid, his beard wild and face covered in grime from the battle. But when he stops to smile, his teeth are surprisingly clean and healthy. How could this be? After all, the Vikings lived in harsh conditions, often without the resources we take for granted today. Yet they had an incredibly sophisticated approach to dental care that would make many modern societies look primitive in comparison. What's most astonishing is that the Vikings didn't have access to the toothbrushes, toothpaste, or dental floss we rely on today. Instead, they used natural materials to clean their teeth. And believe it or not, they had methods that were surprisingly effective. One of the most intriguing practices the Vikings employed was the use of abrasive materials like sand or ground-up bones to scrub their teeth. While it may sound primitive, the rough texture helped remove plaque and other buildup from their teeth, ensuring that they didn't suffer from tooth decay as much as other cultures in history. In fact, Vikings were known for having relatively healthy teeth. You might think their diet, rich in meat, fish, and grains, would leave them with cavities, but archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. Viking skeletons from the Viking Age reveal that many of them had healthy teeth, showing no signs of severe tooth decay. This is a stark contrast to many other civilizations of the same time period, where poor dental hygiene was common and tooth decay was widespread. Now here's a strange fact you probably haven't heard before. Vikings even had a rudimentary form of dental floss. That's right, evidence suggests that they used horsehair to clean between their teeth, much like how we use modern dental floss. Imagine a Viking warrior carefully cleaning the gaps between his teeth using a piece of horsehair before heading into battle. This simple but effective technique would have helped Vikings maintain good oral hygiene and avoid the discomfort of decaying teeth, which could be a serious problem during long raids or journeys. But how did the Vikings manage to maintain their dental tools on the go? Unlike the elaborate toothbrushes and dental care kits we carry today, Vikings didn't have the luxury of a modern dental kit. Instead, they crafted small tools from the natural resources available to them, tools that were portable, durable, and practical. Archaeologists have found evidence of Viking toothbrushes made from twigs or animal bones, which were used to scrape food particles and debris from between their teeth. The fact that these tools were often buried with Vikings indicates how much they value dental care. To them, maintaining good health and hygiene was essential for survival, especially for their warriors. You might be asking, but did they ever face serious dental issues? Yes, they did. While many Vikings managed to maintain their teeth throughout their lives, tooth loss and wear were common, particularly as they aged. The constant grinding of teeth, whether from stress, chewing tough foods, or fighting in battle, could take a toll on their enamel. In fact, the most common dental problem among Vikings was the wear and tear from grinding their teeth. This wasn't just due to diet, but also to the physical stresses of their lifestyle. The grinding could cause severe enamel erosion, leading to tooth sensitivity and in some cases, tooth loss. Viking dental care wasn't just a practical concern, it was part of their larger commitment to health and strength. A good set of teeth wasn't just necessary for eating, it was essential essential for survival, especially for the warriors. In a world where battle was a constant reality, a healthy set of teeth could mean the difference between living to fight another day or facing serious health problems. The Vikings understood that well, and they put effort into taking care of their teeth with the resources available to them. Now, here's the kicker. Even though Viking dental hygiene was relatively advanced for its time, it's unlikely they had the same level of knowledge we do about the importance of oral hygiene. What they did have, however, was a practical, instinctive understanding of what worked. They used the tools and resources around them to keep their teeth in the best possible condition. They knew that maintaining good oral health was vital to their survival and their quality of life. And this brings us to a controversial point. Many people today take modern dental care for granted. We have easy access to advanced dental technologies, products, and expert advice. But what if we told you that, in many ways, the Vikings were ahead of us in some aspects of oral hygiene? They were creative and resourceful in their approach to maintaining health, and their methods, though rudimentary by today's standards, were highly effective for their time. In fact, we can learn a lot from their resourcefulness and practical approach to health. The surprising part about Viking dental care is how well they managed to maintain their oral health without the advanced tools and techniques we have today. Their reliance on natural materials, their focus on preventative care, and their willingness to adapt to their environment all contributed to their surprisingly healthy smiles. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. So, the next time you think about Viking warriors charging into battle, don't just picture them with wild hair and fur-lined cloaks. Picture them with well-maintained teeth and a keen sense of personal care. The Vikings, it turns out, were as savvy about their dental hygiene as they were about their sword fighting. And in a way, their focus on dental health helped them maintain their strength both in battle and in life. Who knew that a warrior's smile could be just as powerful as his sword? You probably think Vikings wore dirty, ripped clothing, right? They were fierce warriors after all, living in harsh conditions and constantly on the move. But here's the twist. Their clothes were surprisingly clean and well-maintained. The idea that Vikings lived in filthy, ragged clothes couldn't be further from the truth. Viking society placed a great emphasis on looking presentable, and their clothes were a reflection of this cultural value. Vikings were deeply aware of their appearance. Just like today, clothing was a way to make a statement. But unlike today, where fashion is often about luxury and status, Viking clothing had a more practical purpose. It kept them warm, protected their bodies from the harsh elements, and, believe it or not, was a symbol of wealth and importance in their society. The Vikings knew that clean, well-maintained clothing showed strength and pride, two things they value greatly. They were warriors after all, and they didn't want to appear anything less than formidable. Imagine a Viking warrior heading into battle, not with torn and ragged clothes, but in garments carefully crafted and well-kept. Viking clothes were typically made from wool, linen, and animal hides, materials designed to protect and last. They were not just throwing on anything they could find. Every piece of their attire was well thought out. Wool, for example, was great for keeping them warm in the freezing Nordic climates, while animal hides provided durability. Linen was woven into fine fabrics, perfect for wearing during the warmer months. But here's something you might not know. Vikings didn't just wear these clothes, they also cared for them meticulously. Today, many of us discard old or worn-out clothes. Vikings took a different approach. They regularly washed their clothes using soap made from animal fats. This soap, much like the soap they used for personal hygiene, helped keep their clothes fresh and free from the odors that would inevitably accumulate in such a tough environment. Think about it. After a long journey or raid, their clothes would undoubtedly get dirty and grimy. But instead of letting the dirt settle, they kept them clean and ready for action. Not only did Vikings wash their clothes regularly, but they also repaired them when they wore out. Garments were designed to last for many years. They were constructed in a way that they could be easily repaired when necessary. A warrior's tunic became torn or damaged, it wasn't discarded. It was stitched up and mended. The care they put into their clothing allowed them to get the most use out of every garment they owned. These garments were an investment, and the Vikings knew that investing in durable, well-maintained clothing would pay off in the long run. Here's a strange fact. Viking clothing wasn't just about keeping warm or looking good. It had a very practical function: protection. When you think about it, Viking clothes were essentially armor. Sure, they wore shields and helmets in battle, but their clothing itself also played a crucial role in protecting their bodies. A thick woolen tunic or leather pants could shield a Viking from the harsh winds, rain, and even the bites of insects. It wasn't just about style, it was about survival. But this emphasis on clean clothing wasn't only for practical reasons. It was also a statement of wealth and status. In Viking society, appearance mattered. Healthy Vikings could afford to keep their clothing in better condition, while poorer individuals might not have had the luxury of as many clothes to maintain. The Vikings took pride in their clothing, and it showed in their culture. A well-maintained clothing was a sign of strength and capability. It showed that you were part of a well-functioning society, one that understood the importance of personal care and hygiene. Here's something controversial you might not agree with. Some historians argue that clothing played a more important role in Viking society than their weapons or shields. While their swords and axes were essential for battle, the state of their clothing had a significant impact on their reputation, both within their society and in the eyes of others. Clean clothes, well-maintained clothing, these were signs of a disciplined, strong individual. When a Viking warrior stepped into into a room or entered a battlefield, their appearance was just as crucial as their battle prowess. They had to look the part of a warrior, a leader, someone worthy of respect. But why were clean clothes so important to the Vikings? The answer lies in their sense of self and pride in their identity. Their clothing wasn't just a necessity, it was an outward expression of their inner strength and discipline. Vikings were deeply connected to their warrior culture, and everything they did was infused with the goal of maintaining their reputation as fierce, capable warriors. Looking good wasn't just about vanity, it was about making sure that everyone, friend or foe, knew that they were ready for battle at any time. How? Consider the following. We often think of the Vikings as rugged, barbaric people, wild and untamed in both behavior and appearance. But the reality is that they were far more sophisticated than that. They understood the importance of clothing, not just for protection or survival, but as an essential part of their identity. For the Vikings, clothing was a way to display strength, pride, and discipline, qualities they held in the highest regard. And in a world where first impressions could make or break you, the way a Viking looked was just as important as how they fought. Here's a rare fact. Vikings often wore garments that were decorated with intricate designs, which indicated their social status and accomplishments. For example, some Viking warriors would wear embroidered tunics with designs that showcased their heritage or victories. This wasn't just about fashion, it was a visual representation of who they were, what they had achieved, and where they came from. These designs made them stand out and helped them communicate their place in Viking society without saying a word. In conclusion, Viking clothing wasn't just about warmth or practicality, it was an essential part of their identity. Their clothes were carefully chosen, meticulously maintained, and worn with pride. Clean clothes weren't just a reflection of their hygiene, they were a reflection of their strength, their discipline, and their place in Viking society. So the next time you think of Vikings, don't just picture them as dirty, ragged warriors. Instead, think of them as individuals who understood the value of presenting themselves well. Warriors with clean clothes, ready for battle, and always prepared to leave a lasting impression. Imagine Vikings smelling like flowers. Not what you expect from a fearsome warrior, right? Yet the Vikings had a surprising fascination with perfumes and scents, and they were far from the dirty, unkempt warriors history often paints them to be. In fact, they made sure they were not just clean, but also pleasant smelling, and their scents were a vital part of their grooming rituals. Most people think of Vikings as smelly, battle-hardened barbarians who only cared about their swords and raids. But the reality is much more interesting. Vikings used natural perfumes and oils to keep their skin and hair smelling pleasant. Picture this. After a long raid or a grueling battle, a Viking warrior would use oils made from local herbs, flowers, and spices to freshen up. These oils weren't just for luxury. They had practical uses too. After a battle, where Vikings would be covered in sweat, blood, and grime, these oils helped mask body odors, making them more presentable when they returned to their homes or met with allies. They had to be sharp, not only in combat, but in every aspect of life, and smelling good was a part of that. The Vikings traded for exotic fragrances from the farthest reaches of their world. These included oils from places as distant as the Mediterranean, Africa, and the Middle East. Imagine a Viking warrior traveling far and wide, returning with rare oils and perfumes that became highly valued within their communities. This trade was a reflection of their sophisticated trading networks, which spanned much of Europe and beyond. In a time where communication was limited, scents became a subtle yet powerful way for the Vikings to show their connections to distant lands and cultures. But here's a fact that may surprise you. Perfumes weren't just for the elites. The Vikings made sure that people of all classes had access to some form of fragrance. Whether it was a simple herbal mixture or more refined oil, scent played a significant role in Viking culture. It was a great equalizer, something that all Vikings could use to improve their personal presentation. The smell of fresh herbs like juniper and birch filled the air, as these plants were often used in creating scents. The Vikings understood that hygiene and smell were part of their identity and how they were perceived by others. Now let's talk about the types of scents Vikings used. Some of their most popular scents came from natural herbs, flowers, and tree oils. Juniper, for instance, was commonly used by the Vikings, and it was known for its fresh, clean smell. Juniper berries were not only used for their aromatic qualities, but also for their medicinal properties. Vikings believed that juniper helped protect them from evil spirits and bad luck, so it was commonly burned as incense during important rituals. Birch, another favorite scent, was used to create a fresh, earthy fragrance that was both relaxing and grounding. This fragrant connection with nature was more than just for luxury. It was part of the Viking connection to the earth, the gods, and the spirits around them. But here's something you probably didn't know. Vikings were so serious about their scents and grooming that they would often create personal care kits, including combs, razors, and grooming oils, all of which would be buried with them when they passed away. These tools weren't just functional, they were also symbolic. The Vikings believed in the importance of maintaining one's appearance in the afterlife, and the grooming tools they were buried with were a reflection of their pride in their appearance and personal care. These items allowed them to continue their grooming rituals even after death, ensuring they were presented in the best possible way when they met their ancestors in the next world. Here's a controversial point. While modern society often places emphasis on cleanliness and looks as a sign of vanity or shallow self-interest, the Vikings understood that personal hygiene and presentation were far from superficial. They were about about survival, status, and respect. For the Vikings, a clean and presentable appearance, bolstered by perfumes and oils, was a sign of power, wealth, and dignity. A Viking warrior's appearance, including his smell, was part of his identity, and it commanded respect. But how did the Vikings manage to achieve such a sophisticated understanding of scent and hygiene? Well, they didn't just rely on trade or natural herbs. The Vikings were skilled in creating their own personal care products. They learned to distill essential oils and create perfume-like scents from the natural resources available to them. It was a skill passed down through generations, as vital as learning how to forge a sword or navigate a ship. Perfume wasn't just a luxury for the rich, it was a practical tool for everyone in Viking society, helping them maintain a sense of cleanliness and dignity, regardless of their social standing. This cultural obsession with smell was integral to their lifestyle. After a long day of battle, a Viking would often wash off the grime and sweat of combat and apply oils or perfumes as a ritual of rejuvenation. This practice wasn't just about feeling clean, it was about restoring themselves to their best form, mentally and physically. For the Vikings, looking and smelling good was a reflection of their inner strength and discipline. It was about maintaining control over their bodies and how they presented themselves to the world. And here's a strange fact that may catch you off guard. Despite the image we often have of Vikings as fierce, brutal warriors, they were incredibly conscious of their presentations. This focus on looking good, smelling good, and maintaining personal hygiene might seem out of place for such a warlike culture. But the Vikings' grooming habits were integral to their sense of identity and warrior ethos. A Viking warrior wasn't just someone who fought. They were also a representative of their culture, their people, and their gods. Personal care and presentation were as much a part of their warrior code as their battle strategies. In conclusion, the Vikings' relationship with perfume and scents was far more than just a luxury. It was a fundamental part of their culture and way of life. They understood the power of smell and how it could influence their status, health, and personal identity. Whether it was masking body odor after battle or trading for exotic fragrances, the Vikings were pioneers in the art of scent. Their understanding of the importance of smell as part of their grooming rituals was advanced, and it's a testament to how sophisticated their hygiene practices truly were. So, the next time you think about Viking warriors, remember, they didn't just conquer lands, they conquered the art of smelling good too. Ever wondered why Vikings were so keen on public baths and grooming? There's more to this than just hygiene. Vikings didn't just practice cleanliness for practical reasons. They understood that personal hygiene was deeply tied to their social, cultural, and even spiritual life. But what really sets the Viking approach to hygiene apart? It was all about presentation, community, and health. Public baths in Viking society were more than just places to get clean. They were essential social hubs. Imagine stepping into a Viking bathhouse. The air is thick with steam, and warriors and townsfolk alike mingle, chatting, swapping stories, and perhaps even discussing business deals. These bathhouses weren't just for the elite. They were open to all, and their communal nature made them a key aspect of Viking social life. While most cultures of the time had little interest in regular bathing, Vikings saw public baths as a necessity. They weren't just about hygiene. They were about socializing and showing off one's physical appearance. But let's talk about the deeper reasons why bathing was so important. Vikings believed that cleanliness was a sign of strength. It wasn't just about looking good, though. It was about presenting yourself as a worthy member of society, a warrior, a leader, or even a merchant. The Vikings were obsessed with their appearance, not in a vain way, but as a symbol of their culture and their status. And when it came to the Vikings' obsession with hygiene, it wasn't just about looking fresh and clean. Good hygiene was also a way to display warrior prowess. If a Viking could maintain a clean, healthy body, it was a reflection of their inner strength. Imagine how important this would be in a culture where warriors were revered. Cleanliness to them was tied directly to physical and spiritual strength. But here's the real kicker. Vikings believed that personal hygiene was crucial to preventing disease, especially after long travels or raids. Disease, particularly lice and fleas, could wipe out entire communities. And with the Vikings' tendency to travel across large expanses of land, whether for raiding or trading, being free of parasites was essential. Public baths helped ensure that the Vikings could remove these pesky invaders. By bathing together in communal spaces, the Vikings were also helping each other stay healthy. It's almost like their hygiene practices were as much about survival as about socializing. And then, there's the fact that hygiene was a way to show pride in one's culture. Viking hygiene practices became a way of signaling belonging. The very act of attending public baths, sometimes even in front of others, was a sign of cultural pride. It wasn't just about getting clean. It was about demonstrating how much you valued your body and your culture's ideals. As a society, they were proud of their appearance and their health, and public hygiene rituals reinforced this. Here's where things get even more interesting. Vikings also believed that keeping themselves clean was a way to honor the gods. They were just washing their bodies. They were purifying themselves spiritually. In Viking culture, cleanliness before battle was seen as a way of preparing to face the gods with honor. This idea wasn't just about fighting battles or preparing for war. It was deeply rooted in their belief that being clean helped maintain a connection with the divine. There was an almost sacred ritual aspect to personal hygiene in Viking society. Bathing, grooming, and using perfumes were not just daily chores. They were acts of purification, a way to honor themselves and their gods. The Vikings' approach to hygiene wasn't just about vanity, disease prevention, or even social interaction. It was about maintaining a balance between the physical, the social, and the spiritual. Their obsession with cleanliness wasn't just a superficial trait, but a reflection of their belief that personal care was an essential part of living a warrior's life. But here's a strange fact that might challenge everything you thought you knew about the Vikings. They didn't just see public bathing as a way to stay clean. They saw it as a form of protection. The Vikings believed that the act of cleansing the body could ward off evil spirits. And when it came to raiding or traveling across dangerous lands, protection was key. Cleanliness, through their bathing rituals, was their way of preparing for the unpredictable, unseen forces they believed could harm them. In Viking society, the concept of public hygiene wasn't only about staying physically clean. It was an integral part of community bonding. It was how Vikings connected with each other and reaffirmed their social roles. Bathing wasn't something done in isolation. It was a collective experience. Everyone, from the wealthiest Viking warrior to the humblest farmer, could share in the communal space, exchanging stories and strengthening the social fabric of their society. Public baths allowed them to display their strength, health, and pride, while also maintaining a sense of equality within their culture. Most importantly, the Vikings' love for public hygiene practices was grounded in their understanding of the practical benefits. By incorporating public baths into their lives, they ensured not only physical cleanliness, but also social unity and spiritual purity. In their world, personal hygiene wasn't just a private affair. It was a public display of who they were and what they stood for. The Vikings' commitment to hygiene wasn't about vanity. It was about survival. Hygiene allowed them to stay healthy, ward off disease, and continue their long voyages and raids. But it was also about pride. Pride in their culture, in their warriors, and in their connection to the gods. So next time you hear about the Vikings, remember, their obsession with cleanliness wasn't as barbaric as you might think. It was a sophisticated practice that helped shape the strength of their society. Viking hygiene wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about survival. Imagine trying to survive in the harsh Nordic climates, where diseases like lice, fleas, and other parasites could wreak havoc on your health. These challenges were made worse by the long, grueling winters and the frequent raiding and traveling that Vikings did. The key to their survival wasn't just strength or skill in battle. It was their hygiene practices. So how did they manage to stay clean and healthy in such an environment? Vikings took personal cleanliness seriously, even if they weren't always able to bathe in the luxurious ways we think of today. In their world, hygiene was a critical element of survival. For one thing, they knew that diseases spread rapidly when you didn't take care of yourself. Lice and fleas could be more than a nuisance. They could carry diseases that were lethal. So, keeping their bodies free from parasites was a top priority. This is where their bathing routines come into play. Contrary to popular belief, Vikings weren't just splashing around in murky rivers. They had sophisticated ways of maintaining cleanliness that helped them stay healthy. Public baths, often located in Viking settlements, were not just for getting clean. They were essential for protecting against the parasites that thrived in unsanitary conditions. And they didn't stop there. After bathing, Vikings would use oils to scrub down their bodies, further preventing parasite infestations and also moisturizing their skin against the harsh cold. Viking hygiene wasn't just about getting clean. It was about staying strong, keeping fit for battle, and maintaining your health for the long haul. When you're traveling or raiding across vast territories, battling the elements and facing disease is as much a challenge as facing your enemies. Hygiene practices gave them an edge. They helped fight off infections, stave off illness, and even combat fatigue, allowing them to maintain their stamina. But the story goes beyond simple hygiene. The Vikings believed that staying clean wasn't just about physical health. It was a spiritual matter too. Bathing and grooming were acts of purification that could help them connect with their gods. Before battle, Vikings believed that keeping their bodies clean was a way to gain favor from the gods and ensure a victory. Their rituals surrounding cleanliness were not only about survival, they were about appeasing the divine, ensuring that they were physically and spiritually prepared to face whatever lay ahead. This connection between hygiene and religion might sound strange to us today, but to the Vikings it made perfect sense. Purification rituals were a part of their spiritual practice, helping them feel strong, invincible, and aligned with the divine. To them, hygiene wasn't just about looking good. It was about preparing themselves to succeed in both the physical and spiritual realms. Interestingly, the connection between hygiene and religion also helped foster a strong sense of community. The Vikings didn't practice hygiene alone. Public baths were important spaces for socializing. These communal gatherings weren't just for cleaning up. They were social events where warriors, traders, and even leaders met to discuss business, gossip, and exchange stories. So, hygiene had a social function too. It was a way of connecting with others in the community, maintaining bonds, and reaffirming shared values. In the harsh, cold environments they lived in, the Vikings' hygiene practices were a matter of life and death. They used water, oils, and public baths not only to stay clean, but also to stave off illness, protect their skin, and prepare for battle. In this way, their hygiene wasn't just about vanity. It was a crucial survival strategy that helped them navigate one of the toughest environments on Earth. But here's the kicker. Viking hygiene wasn't just functional. It also played a role in their identity. A Viking's personal appearance, how well they maintained their body and their clothing, was a symbol of their status and strength. Wearing clean clothes, grooming their hair, and using perfumes weren't just about looking good. They were were signals to others about their place in Viking society. Hygiene practices were a marker of pride, power, and social standing. When you think about it, hygiene was deeply integrated into every aspect of Viking life: survival, community, spirituality, and identity. Their commitment to staying clean was a reflection of their overall worldview, a worldview that saw cleanliness as essential to both physical survival and social cohesion. The real surprise here is just how advanced these practices were. While the Vikings may not have had the modern luxuries we do today, they were ahead of their time when it came to personal hygiene, and this insight into their practices, far from the image of dirty, rough warriors, helps us appreciate just how sophisticated and purposeful their approach to cleanliness was. In conclusion, Viking hygiene wasn't just about surviving harsh environments, it was about thriving in them. The practices they developed were crucial to their ability to conquer the world they lived in. Their commitment to cleanliness helped them stay healthy, connected, and spiritually aligned with their gods. So, the next time you hear about Vikings, don't just think of them as barbaric raiders. Think of them as one of history's most hygienic and health-conscious cultures, who used their personal care rituals to prepare for battle and ensure survival Hostile world. Vikings' cleanliness wasn't just about looks or survival, it was deeply connected to their beliefs. It may sound surprising, but Viking hygiene practices were not only a reflection of personal care, but also tied to their spirituality. The Vikings believed that their physical state, including cleanliness, had a direct impact on their connection with the gods and their success in battle. In a society that valued honor, strength, and favor from the divine, hygiene wasn't a trivial matter. It was a way to appease the gods. Imagine this: before going into battle, a Viking would take extra care in bathing, grooming, and anointing themselves with oils. But it wasn't just about smelling nice or looking good. Vikings believed that cleanliness was a form of spiritual purification, essential for gaining the favor of their gods, particularly the war gods like Odin. The idea was that being pure and presentable made them more worthy of divine protection. And this wasn't a casual practice. It was a ritual, part of their preparation for war, travel, and even major community events. But why was this belief so important to them? For the Vikings, cleanliness was linked to strength and resilience. In their view, taking care of one's body and ensuring that it was free of impurities was a form of spiritual fortification. It wasn't just about surviving the physical dangers of life. It was about thriving spiritually and maintaining the favor of the gods who would guide them in battle. Hygiene wasn't just a matter of avoiding disease. It was a sacred act. These practices went beyond mere superstition. The Vikings were practical people, and they understood that cleanliness helped protect them from diseases. In their world, maintaining a clean body and using oils and perfumes wasn't just a matter of vanity. It was part of staying healthy and strong enough to fight. They associated health and cleanliness with success and survival. So, by cleaning themselves and preparing their bodies, they believed they were putting themselves in the best possible position to succeed. The connection between hygiene and religion also extended to other aspects of Viking life. Rituals before significant battles often involved purification ceremonies. This wasn't just washing away dirt. It was about preparing oneself mentally, physically, and spiritually for the challenges ahead. Cleanliness signified a fresh start, a return to purity, and a reaffirmation of one's strength. But the Vikings didn't just wash for themselves. They did it as a collective. Hygiene wasn't a private act. It was an integral part of Viking culture that was shared by all. Public baths were social events, and these spaces became places where warriors and leaders would meet to prepare for battles. They believed that cleanliness brought them together as a community, strengthening their bonds and aligning their intentions. This social aspect of hygiene was just as important as the physical and spiritual benefits. Surprisingly, this belief wasn't just restricted to the Vikings. Across many ancient cultures, cleanliness was seen as a form of divine favor. The Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all placed great importance on ritual cleanliness, but the Vikings took it a step further by linking it so strongly to their concept of warrior identity and spiritual survival. For them, cleanliness wasn't just an act of survival or social standing. It was essential to their very identity as warriors and as people who lived with a deep respect for the gods. In Viking society, rituals like bathing weren't just about appearing clean. They were about ensuring they were in the right state, both physically and spiritually, to face whatever challenges came their way. The cleanliness of their bodies was seen as an outward reflection of their inner strength and moral purity. The belief that bathing could win divine favor is a powerful example of how Viking hygiene practices were intertwined with their worldview. In conclusion, Viking hygiene practices were far more than what we typically imagine when we think of the barbaric warriors of history. They saw cleanliness as a key to spiritual strength, community unity, and physical survival. So, the next time you think of Vikings, remember that their grooming rituals weren't just about looking good. They were about preparing for battle, ensuring survival, and connecting with the divine in a world full of uncertainty and danger. Cleanliness for the Vikings wasn't just a matter of hygiene. It was an essential practice that sustained their way of life and their place in the cosmos. Water wasn't just for drinking. It was central to Viking health and wellness. At first glance, water might seem like a simple, everyday resource, but for the Vikings, it was far more than just a basic necessity. It was crucial for their survival and hygiene practices. The Vikings built their settlements near clean, flowing flowing water sources, ensuring they had access to fresh water for a variety of uses. These water sources were key not just for drinking but for bathing, washing clothes, and even healing. The Vikings, known for their deep understanding of their environment, made sure their homes were near lakes, rivers, or springs that provided clean, flowing water. This access to fresh water was crucial in an environment where sanitation was often primitive, and a lack of clean water could lead to dangerous diseases. But Vikings didn't just use water for basic hygiene. They also believed it had special properties that contributed to their well-being. In fact, they thought of certain water sources as sacred, believing they had healing properties. Freshwater springs were not only practical resources, they were also spiritual places. The Vikings often visited these sites to perform rituals, believing that the waters could cleanse not just the body, but the soul as well. This connection to water went far beyond practicality. It was deeply woven into their spiritual practices. Even while traveling, the Vikings maintained their reliance on water to stay clean and healthy. They knew that maintaining good hygiene, even on long voyages, was essential to their survival. The Viking ships, designed for both quick raiding and long journeys, would have carried a variety of supplies, including fresh water. This wasn't just for drinking, but for maintaining personal hygiene and washing the body. Even in the midst of long sea voyages, the Vikings ensured that their health wasn't compromised by poor sanitation. This connection to water wasn't only practical for cleanliness, it was also part of their resilience. Without this constant access to clean water, the Vikings would have faced greater risks of disease, infection, and dehydration, all of which could threaten their survival. They understood the importance of hygiene in preventing parasites and illnesses like lice, which were rampant in the harsh climates of northern Europe. Water for the Vikings wasn't just a resource, it was a lifeline. It was a tool for both physical survival and spiritual cleansing. But there's more to the story. The Vikings' use of water is tied to one of their most fascinating cultural practices: their deep belief in the power of water to heal. They didn't just see water as a functional resource, they saw it as a source of divine intervention. Freshwater sources were sacred to them, and their belief in the healing power of water was a central part of their worldview. Whether it was a stream, a well, or a natural spring, the Vikings believed that these waters could cleanse and purify them in ways that went beyond simple hygiene. This connection to water also played a role in the social aspect of Viking culture. As we've seen with their public baths, water was a communal space for the Vikings. It was a place to gather, to socialize, and to perform rituals. Their relationship with water wasn't just about survival, it was about community, spiritual health, and the preservation of their strength. In conclusion, the Vikings' relationship with water was far more than just a means to stay hydrated or clean. It was central to their culture, health, and spirituality. From the sacred springs they visited for rituals to the fresh rivers and lakes that surrounded their settlements, water was a constant presence in their lives. It helped them thrive in harsh conditions, kept them clean, and even strengthened their connection to the divine. So, the next time you think of the Vikings, remember that water was one of their most valuable assets, not just for survival, but for spiritual and communal well-being. Vikings' cleanliness wasn't just about looks or survival, it was deeply connected to their beliefs. Now, you might be thinking, how could something as practical as hygiene have spiritual significance? After all, we often see the Vikings depicted as fierce warriors, living in harsh, wintry conditions. Definitely not the type you'd associate with spirituals and purity. But the reality is far more complex and fascinating. For the Vikings, hygiene wasn't merely about maintaining physical health. It was intertwined with their spiritual well-being and their relationship with the gods. It was believed that keeping the body clean was a way to please the gods and ensure their favor in battle. In fact, Vikings often bathed before significant events, like going to war, because they believed that cleanliness would purify them, making them spiritually ready to face the challenges ahead. This was part of a broader spiritual practice that pervaded Viking life. Much like their gods who were revered for their strength and purity, the Vikings themselves viewed personal cleanliness as a symbol of their own strength and discipline. They didn't just want to look good, they wanted to align themselves with the divine by engaging in acts that reflected order, hygiene, and respect for their bodies. This was particularly important before going into battle, where the consequences of failure were not only physical, but believed to be spiritual as well. The act of bathing before battle wasn't just about physical cleansing, it had a deeper significance. For example, Norse mythology mentions sacred bathing rituals, such as those done in holy waters or special sanctuaries, intended to purify warriors before they ventured into dangerous situations. This wasn't only about removing dirt, this was about making sure their bodies and souls were ready to honor their gods and ancestors. Interestingly, Vikings also performed purifying rituals at feasts, another form of social and spiritual cleansing. It wasn't uncommon for Vikings to make offerings to their gods before important events, and part of these offerings involved rituals of cleanliness and preparation. Their belief was that only those who were pure and spiritually prepared could expect to be victorious in the eyes of the gods, whether it be in battle or during a raid. What's truly intriguing is how these hygiene rituals were integrated into Viking culture. From their beliefs in purification through cleanliness to the active role hygiene played in social and spiritual gatherings, the Vikings saw hygiene not as a mundane activity, but as an essential part of their worldview. Bathing before a raid wasn't just a physical necessity. It was a step toward spiritual renewal and connection with the divine forces they believed controlled their fate. And yet, many people are surprised by how deeply hygiene was tied to the Viking spiritual and cultural identity. They weren't simply obsessed with staying clean for the sake of appearance or health, but as a way to engage in a broader practice that encompassed their gods, ancestors, and warriors' honor. The Vikings believed that good hygiene could ensure favor and protection from the divine, which is why their ritualistic bathing and grooming went far beyond daily hygiene routines. At the heart of all of this is the understanding that for the Vikings, hygiene wasn't just about looking presentable or avoiding disease. It was about aligning with the divine and demonstrating strength, purity, and respect for the sacred forces that governed their lives. This belief in the sacredness of cleanliness is what set Viking hygiene apart from many other cultures of the time and gave it a spiritual depth that we might not expect from such fierce warriors. So, the next time you think about Vikings, remember, their hygiene habits were far from ordinary. They didn't just bathe to remove dirt, they bathed to purify themselves spiritually, to honor their gods, and to ensure their success in battle. Their commitment to personal cleanliness wasn't just a cultural preference. It was a vital part of their spiritual practices and a key to their survival in the harshest of conditions. The Vikings built their settlements near clean, flowing water sources. You may think that this was purely for drinking, but it had a much deeper significance. Water was not just a practical necessity for survival. It played a crucial role in Viking health and wellness. It was integral to their daily routines, from hygiene to healing practices. In fact, the Vikings were so connected to water that they believed it had healing properties, which made their settlements' proximity to clean water sources even more important. As you can imagine, the harsh Nordic environment didn't exactly make personal care easy. So, the Vikings built settlements close to rivers, lakes, and fresh springs. These water sources were not only for drinking, but also for bathing, washing clothes, and cleaning themselves. Keeping clean was important to the Vikings, especially since their winters could last months, and exposure to the cold and dirt could easily lead to illness or infection. But it wasn't just about hygiene. The Vikings were a seafaring people, and they often traveled long distances, sometimes by water to raid or trade. Keeping clean during these long voyages was just as important as it was in their settlements. For the Vikings, the simple act of bathing in water helped them stay healthy and strong. In fact, the Vikings used water as a tool for healing as well. For example, fresh water sources were often believed to have medicinal qualities, and some sites became sacred locations for healing and purification rituals. This reverence for water was connected to their belief in nature's power to cleanse both body and soul. Another fascinating aspect is the role water played in Viking social life. In a world where survival depended on health and cleanliness, it's no surprise that public baths were a popular social activity. Vikings understood the value of good hygiene, and water wasn't just used for personal care but also as a way to gather and bond with fellow community members. Public baths were central to Viking culture, much like saunas are in Scandinavian societies today. Viking settlements, particularly those in Scandinavia, were typically located by bodies of water to take advantage of these natural resources. Rivers and lakes weren't just practical, they were sacred. These bodies of water were often seen as a bridge to the divine, with water believed to hold spiritual power. The Vikings also had deep religious beliefs tied to nature and the elements, and water was no exception. Bathing wasn't just about staying clean, it was a way to purify the body and mind, preparing oneself for spiritual rituals, and, more importantly, ensuring favor from the gods. Did you know that freshwater springs were often seen as healing wells? Vikings believed that water from these sources could cure illness and even prevent sickness. The Vikings took it a step further by associating cleanliness with spiritual purity. To them, water was both a physical and symbolic cleanser, keeping their bodies healthy and their spirits aligned with their god. Interestingly, water also played a role in Viking burial rites. Certain Viking burial sites were near water, and some Viking warriors were even buried at sea. They believed that water was a pathway to the afterlife, where their souls could journey to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. This connection between water health and the afterlife shows just how deeply the Vikings valued water, not just as a tool for survival, but as an essential part of their spiritual practices. The Vikings' relationship with water wasn't just about hygiene or health. It was a deep spiritual connection that shaped their entire worldview. Whether it was a sacred spring, a public bath, or the open sea, water was integral to their culture, health, and beliefs. It's a reminder that for the Vikings, the simple act of staying clean wasn't just about avoiding illness. It was a way to honor their gods, heal their bodies, and prepare their souls for the challenges that lay ahead. In conclusion, the Vikings were not just practical about their water usage, they were reverent and thoughtful, intertwining it with their spiritual practices and daily life. Water was not just an essential resource for survival, but a central pillar of their culture, health, and spirituality. Their belief that water could purify, heal, and connect them to the divine was one of the unique aspects of Viking society that truly set them apart. So, the next time you hear about the Vikings, remember that their deep connection to water wasn't just for practicality. It was a symbol of their health, their faith, and their culture. Vikings believed that water was more than just a tool for survival. They considered freshwater sources, such as rivers, lakes, and springs, to be sacred. The Vikings saw these bodies of water as not only essential essential for their physical health but also for their spiritual well-being. This connection to water was not just practical, it was deeply spiritual. Vikings believed that clean flowing water could heal and purify, offering protection against sickness and spiritual impurity. Their settlements were intentionally built near these water sources, ensuring that they had easy access to clean water for drinking, bathing, and other vital activities. But the Vikings didn't just use water for its physical benefits. They were known to attribute healing powers to it. For them, a bath wasn't simply a routine. It was a cleansing ritual that helped maintain balance between the body and soul. This understanding of water was far ahead of its time. The idea that water could heal is still prevalent today, especially in modern spa and wellness cultures, and the Vikings were some of the earliest practitioners of this belief. On their travels, water was just as important as it was at home. Vikings were seafarers, traveling across the seas to raid, trade, and explore. This journey, often lasting months, required the Vikings to stay clean, not just for health reasons, but also to maintain their strength. Fresh water was vital during these voyages, and the Vikings' close proximity to clean water sources helped them stay healthy during their long travels. Their deep connection with water was not only about drinking, it was essential for personal hygiene and even for spiritual rejuvenation. Freshwater bodies, like springs and rivers, were viewed as sources of life, vitality, and spiritual power, and Viking culture reflected this reverence in many aspects of daily life. In Viking society, water was often a symbol of purity. Bathing, especially in natural water sources like hot springs or saunas, was an essential part of their lives, and it was an activity that linked the physical body with the spiritual world. Just as they used water for their physical needs, the Vikings believed it could purify them spiritually, ensuring that they were clean in both body and soul before going to battle or engaging in important rituals. While bathing was an important daily activity, it wasn't always a solitary one. The Vikings often gathered in public baths, which were more than just places to wash. They were social spaces. Public baths played a central role in Viking communities, serving as hubs where people could gather, share stories, and even discuss important matters. This communal bathing tradition was reflective of Viking society's belief that cleanliness and socializing went hand in hand. The baths were a space for maintaining not just personal hygiene, but also social harmony and community strength. Interestingly, the Vikings didn't just use water for bathing, they incorporated it into their healing practices as well. Fresh water was often believed to have healing properties. Sacred springs and lakes were used for religious rituals, and people would travel to these places in hopes of curing ailment. The Vikings believed that water could cleanse both body and mind, and many of their rituals involved bathing in sacred bodies of water to purify themselves spiritually. This practice would later influence medieval health and wellness practices, where baths and healing waters were integral to maintaining health. The Vikings were highly attuned to the effects of nature, and their relationship with water went far beyond what most people think. It wasn't just about keeping their bodies clean, it was about preserving their lives and their spirits. Water was seen as a way to protect them, help them heal, and connect with their gods. And this understanding of water as a source of life and vitality shaped much of their culture, from their belief in sacred springs to their careful placement of settlements near freshwater sources. In the harsh Nordic climate, where winters could be long and brutal, having access to clean water was a matter of survival. The Vikings knew that staying clean wasn't just a luxury, it was essential for health. Their hygiene practices were designed to protect them from illnesses like lice and parasites, which were rampant in such cold and damp conditions. Water wasn't just used for bathing, but for washing clothes and keeping their living spaces clean. The Vikings' relationship with water was more than just functional. It was about staying healthy, fighting off diseases, and maintaining a life of vigor and strength. It's incredible to think about how much of Viking culture revolved around water. The Vikings were ahead of their time, understanding its significance not just as a resource but as a sacred and vital force in their daily lives. They didn't just use water to wash, they revered it, believed in its healing properties, and viewed it as an essential part of their spiritual and physical health. Their connection to water set them apart, making their hygiene practices both advanced and deeply intertwined with their beliefs about life, death, and the gods. Now, the next time you think of Vikings, imagine them not just as fierce warriors but as people who valued cleanliness, health, and community. They understood that water wasn't just a resource to be used, it was a powerful force to be revered and respected. Their practices have influenced modern health and wellness, from the sauna culture of Scandinavia to our modern appreciation for the healing power of water. The Vikings, in their wisdom, understood something that we are only beginning to rediscover today: that water is central to both survival and spiritual well-being. Vikings didn't just use water for basic survival, they believed that water had the power to heal. For them, fresh water wasn't just a commodity, it was sacred. Rivers, lakes, and springs were central to Viking spiritual practices. They viewed water as a source of life and energy, not just a tool for physical cleansing, but for mental and spiritual well-being too. Settlements were strategically placed near clean, flowing water sources, providing easy access to both drinking water and the resources necessary for their daily lives. This connection to water was more than practical, it was profound. Vikings built their homes and towns along rivers and lakes because they understood that staying close to these life-giving bodies of water was essential for their survival. In fact, many Viking rituals rituals involved water as a means of spiritual renewal. The water they used to wash off sweat or dirt was also seen as a conduit for purification. The Vikings also believed in the healing power of water. Freshwater springs were thought to have restorative properties, and many traveled to these sacred sites seeking cures for ailments. It wasn't uncommon for the Vikings to perform rituals or sacrifices near these waters, as they believed these acts would secure the favor of the gods and keep them healthy. There's even evidence that they used these waters for medicinal purposes, mixing them with herbs to create healing concoctions. Water also played a central role in Viking voyages, and this deep connection extended across their seafaring culture. As expert sailors, the Vikings spent much of their lives traveling across oceans and rivers. On long voyages, maintaining access to fresh water was critical. Not only did it sustain them physically, but it also allowed them to maintain their hygiene practices while at sea. The Vikings understood that being clean and healthy was essential for survival on these extended journeys, where disease and infection could spread quickly if hygiene was neglected. Their commitment to staying clean was not simply a matter of personal health, but part of a larger system of beliefs. The Vikings considered their bodies to be sacred vessels, and by maintaining cleanliness, they believed they could maintain strength and vitality. This reverence for water was reflected in how they prepared for battle. They believed that cleanliness and purification were necessary before they could face the gods and embark on raids. In their minds, staying physically pure allowed them to spiritually connect with their deities. Interestingly, the Vikings didn't just use water for bathing or drinking. They saw it as a symbol of purity and renewal. For them, the act of bathing wasn't simply about getting clean. It was about preparing their bodies and minds for the challenges ahead. Whether it was in hot springs or sacred lakes, the Vikings made sure to immerse themselves in water to refresh and renew both physically and spiritually. Viking society's use of water set the stage for later health and wellness trends. Even today, modern spas and saunas are rooted in the same principles the Vikings upheld. Water is not just for hydration, but for rejuvenation, purification, and healing. The Vikings understood something that we are only beginning to rediscover in the modern world: the power of water to cleanse and revitalize. What makes this even more intriguing is that the Vikings' relationship with water influenced more than just their health. It shaped their culture. This profound connection to water permeated their entire society, from their daily hygiene practices to their spiritual rituals, and even how they navigated the world. For the Vikings, water wasn't just a necessity, it was sacred. So the next time you think of the Vikings, imagine them not just as fierce warriors, but as people who revered water, understood its importance in maintaining health, and believed in its power to cleanse both body and spirit. Their deep connection to water was an integral part of their survival, their culture, and their ability to thrive in an unforgiving environment. The Vikings didn't just value cleanliness as a practical matter, it was woven into their spiritual and cultural fabric. Hygiene wasn't just about maintaining good health or appearances for them, it was a way to communicate with the gods. They had deep-rooted beliefs that staying clean would help them earn divine favor before they went into battle. In fact, Viking cleanliness was so intertwined with their spirituality that it became a part of their religious rituals. Think about it. Before preparing for a raid or a major battle, Vikings would often cleanse themselves in sweat baths or by bathing in sacred waters. The act of bathing, grooming, and purifying themselves was believed to ensure they were spiritually and physically ready for the challenges they would face. But it wasn't just for battle. They considered cleanliness to be part of their preparation for important rituals, sacrifices, or even feasts. Their bodies had to be in a state of purity to honor the gods, ensuring that they were worthy of receiving blessings for their action. These hygiene rituals didn't just stop at washing or scrubbing. Vikings believed that maintaining personal cleanliness also showed respect to the divine. Many Viking raids and social events were preceded by these purification rites. So cleanliness in Viking culture was both a physical and a spiritual practice, something that was essential not only for survival, but also for maintaining the favor of the gods. But here's where it gets interesting. It wasn't just about personal belief. Vikings used these rituals to build and maintain their warrior culture. In their eyes, to be clean was to be strong, focused, and capable of facing the gods themselves. Viking hygiene was therefore a mix of pragmatism, tradition, and faith. They took great pride in their grooming and bathing practices, which were designed to prepare them for both the physical demands of battle and the spiritual requirements of their culture. They viewed cleanliness as a way of fortifying their bodies and souls. These rituals helped to build a sense of unity and discipline within Viking society, as the act of maintaining one's cleanliness was done for a much higher purpose than just looking presentable. It was about honoring their gods, their culture, and their warrior identity. Here's a fascinating fact. One of the most significant aspects of Viking religious rituals was purification, and it didn't stop with hygiene. The Vikings believed that water was not just a physical cleanser but a spiritual one too. Bathing before an important event like a raid wasn't just to remove dirt, it was to remove any spiritual impurities they might carry with them. Water in the Viking world held immense power to cleanse both body and soul. It wasn't just about keeping clean either. The process itself was ritualized. Whether it was soaking in a hot spring or using oils to cleanse their skin, these actions were considered sacred. By keeping their bodies pure, they were preparing to honor the gods in the best way possible. They didn't just view cleanliness as a way to avoid disease or to to smell better. They saw it as a way to connect to the divine. This belief system laid the foundation for how the Vikings viewed health, strength, and spirituality. In their minds, cleanliness was an integral part of being a strong, capable warrior. As strange as it may sound today, the Viking approach to hygiene was far ahead of its time, both practical and profoundly spiritual. So next time you think about Viking warriors, remember that their grooming habits were a lot more sophisticated and meaningful than we've been led to believe. The fascinating part is that this connection between hygiene and religion didn't just end in the Viking Age. Their legacy continues to influence modern hygiene practices today. From our appreciation of baths and saunas to organic soaps and oils, the Viking influence on our modern skincare routines is undeniable. Vikings, often romanticized for their fearsome warrior status and brutal raids, are far more complex than most people realize. They weren't just barbaric marauders, they were sophisticated individuals with a deep appreciation for cleanliness and hygiene. The truth? Vikings were some of the cleanest people in history, and it wasn't just about survival. It was a fundamental part of their culture and belief system. You might think Vikings were dirty, but here's a surprising fact. They regularly bathed, something that many cultures of the time didn't do. Bathing for them wasn't just about hygiene, it was a social practice, a sign of wealth and status, and even an important part of religious rituals. That's right, for Vikings, staying clean meant much more than preventing disease. It was a way to stay connected with the gods and prepare for battle. But how did they manage this, you ask? Did they have fancy shampoos, modern soaps, or even a rudimentary health system? Not exactly, but what they had was far more practical and resourceful, using nature and their surroundings to stay healthy and clean. Let's take a journey through Viking hygiene practices, and you'll see just how advanced and surprisingly modern their methods were. Viking settlements were often built near natural sources of clean, flowing water, rivers, streams, and springs. The Vikings believed water had healing powers, which is why they not only used it for drinking and bathing, but also for purifying their bodies before embarking on significant events or battles. Imagine this. The Vikings considered water so sacred that their bodies were washed before a battle to ensure they were spiritually ready. It wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about being strong enough to face their gods and their enemies. Their bathing practices involved regular routines that were well ahead of their time. Public baths were common in Viking towns, and hot springs were frequently used for cleansing rituals. They didn't just wash themselves off to remove dirt. These baths were deeply tied to their belief system. Bathing was seen as a necessary step before going into battle, cleaning both the body and the soul in preparation for the challenges ahead. They even had sweat baths or steam saunas that were heated by stones placed in the middle of the room. After these intense steam sessions, Vikings would scrub themselves down with oils and continue with their grooming routines, which for them was an essential practice for maintaining strength. The Vikings also had a deep appreciation for their appearance, which is often overlooked in modern portrayals. Most people imagine Viking men with wild, unkempt hair, but the truth is they took grooming very seriously. They had small, detailed grooming tools, like combs made from bone or wood, and even razors and tweezers. These tools were often carried daily, showing just how committed they were to personal cleanliness. For the Vikings, having neat hair wasn't just about appearance. It was a status symbol. The better your hair looked, the more you were respected in Viking society. But they didn't stop there. These grooming rituals were also tied to their religious beliefs. Vikings thought that by keeping their bodies clean, they were pleasing their gods. When they went into battle, they believed cleanliness made them more likely to succeed and gain favor in the eyes of the gods. Even before significant social events or ceremonies, the Vikings would engage in purifying rituals. Cleanliness was a physical manifestation of their readiness, their strength, and their devotion. Another surprising fact, Vikings had their own version of soap. And no, it wasn't anything like the soaps we use today. Viking soap was created from animal fat and plant ashes, which they used to clean both their hair and skin. It was thick, pungent, and effective at removing dirt and oils from the body. In fact, they used it as a sort of shampoo for their long locks. Despite its strong odor, this soap helped keep the Vikings clean and healthy, important factors when living in a harsh, cold environment. Dental care was also an essential part of Viking hygiene. While most people might assume that Vikings didn't care much for their teeth, the opposite is true. Vikings used abrasive materials like sand or ground-up bones to clean their teeth, and they even created rudimentary toothbrushes using twigs and animal hairs. They may not have had modern dental floss, but evidence suggests that Vikings used horsehair to clean between their teeth. Pretty advanced for their time. Keeping their teeth clean was important for survival. Good teeth were necessary not only for eating but also for fighting. Clothing maintenance was another area where the Vikings stood out. You might think they wore torn, dirty clothes from all the raiding, but that's not the case. Vikings took great pride in their clothing. They used soap made from animal fats to clean their clothes, and they regularly repaired them. In fact, their garments were made from wool, linen, and animal hides, which required careful upkeep. Viking clothing wasn't just about warmth or protection. It was also about showing wealth and status. Clean, well-maintained clothes were a reflection of a person's social standing. But it wasn't just about hygiene for hygiene's sake. The Vikings knew that staying clean in their harsh environment was critical for survival. Ice and fleas were rampant in many parts of the world, but the Vikings understood that bathing regularly regularly, and using oils to protect their skin was a powerful way to keep parasites at bay. In fact, these hygiene practices played a vital role in keeping them healthy and strong, particularly after long raids or harsh winter seasons. In modern times, we can still see the lasting influence of Viking hygiene practices. The love of public baths and saunas, the use of natural oils and soaps, and even the grooming rituals they developed all laid the foundation for our current appreciation of personal care. The Vikings' commitment to cleanliness wasn't just a matter of survival. It was part of their identity as a people, their pride, and their spirituality. Let's wrap this up with a surprising twist. The Vikings weren't the dirty, barbaric warriors that many people believe them to be. They were in fact advanced in their hygiene practices, using their grooming rituals and clean habits to survive, thrive, and connect with their gods. So the next time you hear about Viking warriors, remember, their cleanliness was a part of their strength and their legacy, and that's something far more impressive than what you might think. Viking hygiene wasn't just about surviving the harsh conditions of their environment. It was a matter of culture, religion, and pride. Many people today associate Vikings with brutality and dirtiness, but that's not the full story. In fact, the Vikings were among the cleanest people of their time, taking grooming seriously and using natural resources to maintain cleanliness. Imagine a Viking warrior not just raiding, but also engaging in regular, sophisticated grooming practices. Let's dive into the surprising hygiene habits of the Norse warriors. Before we go further, you may be wondering, what exactly was so impressive about Viking hygiene? After all, didn't they live in a harsh, cold environment? Now, here's the first surprising fact. Vikings bathed regularly, something that many cultures at the time didn't do. And it wasn't just for cleanliness. It was about status, appearance, and a deep cultural belief in the importance of being presentable and spiritually pure. One of the most striking facts about Viking hygiene is that they had an extensive bathing routine. Now, this isn't the stereotypical splash in the river scenario you might expect. Vikings bathed in public baths, something that might seem surprising given the common belief that they were dirty, barbaric warriors. These public baths were present in Viking settlements, particularly in Scandinavian towns. They used hot springs to wash off, taking advantage of the natural resources around them. Bathing wasn't just about getting clean, it was also a status symbol. People who could bathe regularly were seen as higher status, and the cleanliness of their appearance was a matter of great importance. Vikings were meticulous about looking presentable, not just for themselves, but for others in their society. This reveals just how much appearance mattered in their culture, something you may not have guessed about these fearsome warriors. On top of their regular baths, Vikings were deeply invested in grooming, and this wasn't just for vanity's sake. They understood that grooming was a sign of respect, not only for themselves but for their gods. Personal grooming tools such as combs made from bone or wood were common, and both men and women carried them. Vikings were meticulous about their hair, using these tools to ensure it was kept neat and styled. Hair was a status symbol in Viking society. The more elaborate the hairstyle, the higher the social standing. For Vikings, hair wasn't just a physical attribute. It was a mark of identity and worth. These grooming tools were so important that they were sometimes buried with the Vikings, showing just how deeply these tools were valued. But grooming wasn't the only part of their hygiene. Vikings also used soap, though not the kind you might be thinking of. Viking soap was made from animal fat and plant ashes, and it wasn't a gentle, fragrant body wash like what we use today. It was a thick, pungent paste that was effective at removing dirt and oil. They used this soap primarily for washing their hair, a precursor to modern shampoo. In a way, the Vikings had their own natural, no-frills form of hair care. Soap wasn't just about cleanliness. It was a practical tool that allowed them to stay healthy and free from the dirt that could easily accumulate in their harsh, cold environment. Vikings' understanding of hygiene, even at this early stage, was surprisingly advanced. Of course, staying clean and healthy wasn't just about looking good, it was about survival. Living in cold, harsh climates, the Vikings had to protect themselves from lice and fleas, which could spread diseases. By bathing regularly, they kept their bodies free of parasites. They didn't just wash off dirt, they ensured they were protecting themselves from the very real dangers of their environment. Oils were used to protect their skin from the harsh cold, ensuring that the weather didn't leave them vulnerable to illnesses. Cleanliness wasn't just an aesthetic for the Vikings, it was an essential part of staying strong and healthy. They knew that the better they cared for their bodies, the better they would be prepared for the battles ahead. Hygiene helped keep them fit for battle, improving their stamina and strength, both of which were crucial for their survival. Interestingly, this commitment to cleanliness had a spiritual component too. For the Vikings, hygiene wasn't just a physical practice, it was deeply connected to their religious beliefs. They believed that being clean before going into battle was a way to gain favor from their gods. Bathing wasn't only about staying physically strong, it was about ensuring spiritual purity. Just as soldiers today may prepare mentally for battle, Vikings made sure their bodies were physically and spiritually prepared. Cleanliness in their minds could help them win favor in their raids and in their interactions with their gods. It's a fascinating link between hygiene and spirituality, one that few people typically associate with Viking culture. But the Vikings didn't just care about their personal cleanliness, they also had a strong social component to their hygiene. Public baths were communal spaces where people from all walks of life gathered. These baths were not only for washing off, they were places for social interaction, to meet friends, exchange news, and even showcase one's physical appearance. appearance. It was an equalizer. People from all classes used the public baths, which made hygiene a shared practice across Viking society. The idea was clear. Good hygiene wasn't just about cleanliness. It was a way of showing pride in your health and your place in Viking society. It was a way of demonstrating that you respected yourself, your fellow Vikings, and your culture. Vikings also valued clean clothes, which might seem surprising given the harshness of their environment. While many may think of Vikings wearing dirty, torn clothes from all their raiding and fighting, this was not the case. Viking clothing was made of wool, linen, and animal hides, materials that required regular care. Vikings washed their clothes regularly using soap made from animal fats, and they took great care to repair them. Clothing wasn't just about warmth and protection. It was a way to show one's social standing. Well-maintained clothing was a sign of wealth, a luxury in a time when resources could be scarce. Clean clothes were a reflection of your status in Viking society, and the Vikings took great pride in looking their best. The Vikings' commitment to cleanliness may also surprise you in terms of their trade network. They didn't just use basic local scents. Vikings used perfumes and oils made from herbs, flowers, and spices. The use of fragrances wasn't just a luxury, it was part of their grooming practices. They traded for exotic fragrances, which shows just how advanced their trading networks were. These scents weren't just used for luxury, they were practical. After a long day of battle or travel, Vikings used these perfumes to mask body odors, making them smell as good as they looked. The Vikings' fascination with smell shows just how sophisticated their grooming rituals were. As we wrap up, it's clear that Viking hygiene was far more than just a necessity. It was a deeply ingrained part of their culture, identity, and survival. From bathing regularly to using natural soap and oils, Vikings were ahead of their time when it came to personal care. They understood that staying clean wasn't just about looks, it was about strength, survival, and even spirituality. So the next time you think about Viking warriors, remember, they weren't just savage raiders. They were clean, well-groomed, and ready to conquer the world. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.